I will. Hello. So we are live. I am Kate Howe. I'm the co-founder of Postcards for Parents. I'm with Dr. John Stewart.
Good to be here, Kate. I'm honored to be your lead clinical person, and look forward to our discussion today.
Yeah, thanks. So today we're talking about parent self-care. So it's a little bit of a shift. I mean, it might seem like a shift from talking about issues particularly pertaining to kids or struggles they're having or struggles between parents and kids. This is really about like, how do parents take care of themselves so that they can be the best parents that they can be. And I think that parent self-care is both like a trendy topic and also like a relatively new, at least to my knowledge, kind of player in the parenting discussion. Like it was always like, what do you need to do for your kids and what's wrong with your kids? It wasn't like, how do you need to take care of yourself in order to be able to have this relationship with your kids? So what does parent self-care mean to you?
Everything you just said, and I think that there are different spheres or different aspects of what self-care is about, particularly parental self-care. Parental self-care is a reference to the fact that there is a relentlessness about your obligation as a parent to, when they're little, just to keep them alive, and then when they get older and they're teenagers, to keep them alive. And somewhere in the middle there, that's to teach them and love them and help them do other things. I'm teasing you. Those obligations span, but there's some parallels. I think that when you think about the directive on an airplane, when they tell you if the cabin loses pressure and you are there with someone for whom you are responsible, you got to take care of yourself first. You got to put the oxygen mask on yourself first. And then you're going to be in a position to be able to help those around you. So I think that sometimes self-care for some parents can feel a little selfish. And, selfish is a funny term because it's almost as if we're not supposed to have a self that we lovingly take care of.
Yeah.
We are supposed to have a self that we lovingly take care of, but we're not there for ourselves or anybody else. So I think that it's absolutely essential for us to be able to perform in this task that requires as much attunement, as much eloquence, as much energy, as much patience. I mean, being a parent is a hard job because it's so important. And if you feel like you're blowing it, the consequences to your sense of well-being are so awful. The consequences for your kids, if it isn't going well, are not good. So, I mean, there are high stakes and lots of demands. And most of us have not had ideal role models to approach this task.
I'm actually really curious about what you're saying about this idea that self-care is selfish. And I feel like there's sort of a guilt. And I don't know if this is like more pronounced for women than for men, or women still kind of take on more of the childcare burden. But, how do you think it became, like, where did that idea come from? I mean, I think it's pervasive, but like, why do we think it's selfish, and how, and I feel like even that perception is bad because then people either feel like they don't really enjoy it when they're kind of taking time for themselves, or, they have to hide it, or they feel like they're going to get censured from somebody else. So where did that come from, and how do you see that playing out?
I think it comes from a lot of places. If we look at our culture, I mean, everything from, the Calvinists to the Catholic Church. I mean, there has been an awful lot of messaging about the fact that you shouldn't attend to yourself. Now, I want to be very clear that it is not through exclusive focus on oneself that one finds well-being.
Right.
The same token, it's not. If we go back to the airplane metaphor, it's not that the passenger puts the oxygen cannula on themselves, starts to feel better, and watches the people around them who rely on them kind of drift off. That's not. It's the balance. You got to do both. And I think that what is it in our culture? I think it's the level of commitment that we probably biologically carry, from an evolutionary standpoint to care for our children. I think that there are cultural factors such as the church, and it's not to malign the church for that. It's just to say that's one of the places. I think that we hold selflessness in our culture in very high esteem. For instance, to give one's life as a soldier,
right?
An act of selflessness. I mean, I think and I'm not saying that I'm not saying I don't see the value or have not been the beneficiary of that. I'm just saying there are a lot of things out there that probably provide some subtle messages that maybe you're not supposed to take such good care of yourself, or maybe you're not supposed to even attend to yourself.
Yeah.
So,
And from what you see, would you say, is that counterproductive? Like, do people, okay, so even like not considering the self, is that counterproductive to how much good somebody can do to other people if they don't?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think in the some of the mindfulness meditations, the Buddhist loving kindness meditations, they have and many centering prayer meditations from the Catholicism, they all have an aspect of them that comes back to say, essentially, to look for and seek loving kindness for ourselves as well as for others. So, I mean, I think that I don't think it's hard, as much as there may be many things that kind of promote the notion of selflessness as being the noble path. There are also a lot of wisdom out there about the power and the importance of taking good care of ourselves. Part of the dilemma, though, then goes to, all right, it's really important to take care of ourselves. Well, what is that? What is it?
Okay, wait. I want to get there, but I want to like thoroughly put to bed. So we've just said it's not even better for everybody else if you don't take care of yourself. So we don't want
any. How can you take care of anybody else if you're not taking care of yourself? You lose your ability to be resilient, your ability to be patient, your ability to, you lose, if you are essentially dropping off. Sometimes they give I've always liked the analogy of you give away your seed crop. Well, give away your seed crop. Maybe somebody's going to eat for a day, but next year, nobody's going to eat.
Right. Yeah.
Just being really careful about that. Absolutely.
So how do people even, so if they believe that if they have, hear that either here or elsewhere or whatever, say I'm like on board with that intellectually, how do I get rid of that kind of guilt that I have, or the feeling that I have to like sneak it, or, oh my gosh, am I going to get criticized for, taking the night off and handing the kids over to my husband or whatever it is, how, do you have any recommendations for that?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of them. I mean, I think there are a lot of things that we do that do kind of nurture ourselves, and in the process, we gain a sense of being able to be more present and loving towards others. I mean, I think that I think rarely does the process of caring for ourselves not end up having some rewards that are seen as both good for us as well as good for the people that we love. Mm-hmm. But how do we get rid of the guilt or shame? I mean, I spend a lot of my time trying to help people get rid of that guilt or shame. Yeah, I spend a lot of time myself trying to get rid of it. And so I don't think there's an easy answer for that. I think that in many respects, for me, one of the silver bullets are certain practices that provide a distinct experience of oneself, distinct from shame, distinct from fear. I think that gratitude practices, the idea of, really getting in the habit of 3 or 4 or 5 times a day, stopping for 3 seconds, taking a breath, and being grateful. Be grateful for the sun that's there. Be grateful for the cute dog that just walked by you. Be grateful for the deep breath of air, for the good sneeze you just had. And being grateful entails essentially just stopping and noticing. Gratitude is not about I'm walking around grateful all the time. We'd hate anyone who did that. Mm-hmm. Gratitude is a practice. And so I think gratitude, I think the choice of certain practices will help us just kind of soften to the notion that self-care is good. I mean, I think one of the other things that's really wonderful about self-care is that one aspect of self-care is taking care of our relationships, our relationship with our partner, our relationship with our friends. And then that, as we take care of ourselves in the context of connecting with these people that we care about, they too benefit from it. So, I mean, I think there are many.
Yeah, that's an interesting frame. So it's sort of like instead of the expectation of taking care of other people, which is like not necessarily self-care, you're talking about, say more about taking care of the relationships and how that's.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, through COVID, I think we've had some real opportunity to understand some of the cost of isolation. Mm-hmm. I just think my own life. I have two very close friends who we once a week or once every 2 weeks get together for dinner. And for the longest time, this is recorded in Maine. We're in Maine, which meant much of the winter was cold, and we were outside for most of it. We were either around a fire or just bundled in. But that experience of these two friends coming together, our three friends coming together, we all look forward to it. It was something that it nurtured our spirits, that capacity to be together. So, I mean, I think that was one type of self-care that involved the sharing of our lives. All right. I think we're having a little camera problem, but I think we're back now.
Okay.
I mean, that's an illustration. I mean, I think going out, for a date night, it's one of the first things I talk about with parents in self-care, because there's self-care of yourself individually, but then there's a corporate self-care, and that families are doing generally about as well as mom and dad are doing together. So when you get to have self-care where you have a date night, you go out to dinner and you get to pretend you don't have children, or you have a rule you don't even talk about your children, or that's just, that's so important. It's so important as an aspect of self-care in the context of a family.
Yeah, so I love that. So it's like, I guess if I'm stuck on this idea of like the people in my head who might be like telling me I couldn't take the self-care, what if I just go off and have fun with them, and then like they can't really criticize me because they're having fun too.
I like that. They become a co-conspirator in this whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, would you even say that with your kids, if you focus on more of things that are fun for you instead of taking care of them, would that be self-care?
I think absolutely. I mean, I think the process of, it's one of the things that Dan Siegel in the Whole Brain Child, one of the last parts on it is pump up the fun factor. Find ways to step away from things that entail struggle or kind of selflessness. Fun is something that really needs to be experienced on both sides. It doesn't mean that the adult isn't, maybe showing up in a little different way, a little more intent on bringing the energy of fun to it. But there's no question that really powerful experiences of fun that are so restorative to kids and to adults, when you're doing that, it's reciprocal. It's filling one another up. And so, I absolutely think that just having fun, finding ways to step away. I mean, I've worked with some families from time to time who were really struggling, and one of the pieces of homework might be, and they'll look at me like I'm insane when I say this, is I want you all five to play miniature golf next week before you see me. Miniature golf, I don't want to see you. Now they may go have a horrible time in miniature golf, but at the same time, they can also consider even if they have a horrible time, they can come together in this joyful disdain for me.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I don't want to get too practical, but I feel like one of the things that gets in the way of that is being like, oh, but the laundry, but the dishes, but the work I have to do. Is it just like, should we just have less clean houses and more fun? I mean, is that how do you feel?
You're asking me in terms of well-being for all concerned?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. However, I mean, it doesn't mean, some people, they need order around them to be able to have order within them. And so I'm not suggesting that you're not supposed to pay attention to that part of yourself. But, I was with a family last week talking to them about a little girl. And they just kind of looked at each other. And I said, ritual structure is kind of nice, some predictability. And, they just looked at each other like, oh, that just isn't going to happen in this family. and then I got a sense that this was probably a pretty fun place to be, because not too many things took precedence over figuring out how to have fun. They talked about people coming in and out. It sounded a little hectic, a little chaotic, but by the same token, they both seemed to have a high tolerance for that.
Mm-hmm.
They had a little girl who was struggling with it a little bit, but you have to figure that out. But I think that the ability to be able to say what's most important here.
Mm-hmm.
What do I really want to do? And I think as a young dad, if I were to look back at my life, I would say, I was a young professional trying to get through my doctorate and then move on. We had 2 children by the time I'd finished my PhD. And it was one thing that I wish I would have done. It would have slowed down and let some things go. And just play with. And it wasn't that I was awful, because I wasn't. But I didn't tip the scale in the direction that I wish I would have.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And
let's see about grandkids. We do it.
And so what I'm really hearing you say is that it's like what's needed in the moment and a balance, both getting stuff done and making time to have fun.
Yeah. I mean, one of the dilemmas that you're going to have in almost any of this stuff is you're going to have, if you have a partner, if you have a husband or wife, and you're co-parenting, you're going to have different sensibilities about some of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the process of reaching consensus on how are we going to manage this? How are we going to manage that mom or dad really needs it really orderly, and mom is kind of a little more into playful rolling with it.
Yep.
And how do we figure out a way that allows both to thrive? Because once again, I used the metaphor before that our families are kind of like small planes, and the parents are the pilots and our kids are the passengers. And the thing is that in small planes, I guess in large planes too, both pilots have controls.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not collaborating, it's going to be a mess. And so, I mean, I think that in self-care, in figuring out what are the priorities, when are we going to step back and just enjoy one another, try to be playful, those sort of things that don't have a drive to them, like a boss saying you got to have this in by tomorrow or this.
Mm-hmm.
If self-care is going to be attended to, it's really going to be useful when both parents can kind of come to a way of understanding what it is that you're wanting to preserve and how you're going to preserve it.
Yeah, that really makes sense. And do you have any general like guidelines, or is it just particularly individual to the person in the family? Like how much of that kind of enjoyment should be together versus like going off and being with your friends or doing a hobby or doing things that are outside the family?
It's very much on the individual. I mean, I think some folks are by temperament pretty introverted, and it's not to say they don't enjoy people, but they are restored. Their batteries kind of charge and quiet. And if we look at my relationship with my wife, I'm more social than Jan is. Jan needs quiet time,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what she needs to be able to be all that she wants to be for her kids or grandkids or me. And just figuring figuring that out. And how do I, I mentioned before, I have this at least one night every week or every 2 weeks where I go out to dinner with these two buddies of mine, and she's, oh, good God, she couldn't be happier.
Because that's her special time as well.
That's our special time. And I mean, I think that, and everybody's different. So you just have to figure that out and try not to take it personally. Try to be playful about that stuff. The recognition that you're different and playful. There was a song in the 60s by a guy named, a band called Dan Hicks and the Hot Licks. And Dan Hicks, the song was, how can I miss you if you won't go away? All we ever do is stay and stay and stay. I can hear my wife humming that from time to time. Which means
a lot of families are humming that these days.
I should go out and work in the workshop, or I should do something when it's all part of playfulness, that stuff is so much easier. When it feels like you're being cast off. Part of what she's saying is, I'm going to be my best if you'll get the hell out of here for a little while. That's a gift. That's a gift.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so now I cut you off before, but I do want to hear what you were saying about, like, if we're talking about self-care, then we have to kind of know a little bit about the self, or like, what are we nurturing? What are we trying to find? What are we trying to restore?
I mean, I think the self is pretty hard to define. I mean, I think there have been lots of people who've done it. It's like the process of defining consciousness. There have been whole fields of psychology, self-psychology, one of them, that have been completely focused on understanding and the nurturing of that. I do think, for me, it's probably easiest to think about it as aspects of our core felt sense, not just our thinking sense, but our felt sense. And I don't know who did it originally, but the kind of 5 spheres of the self. That there's the emotional sphere, the intellectual sphere, the physical sphere, physical. All right, right. Whenever I say there's so many things, and then I start to count emotional, physical, intellectual,
social.
Thank you. And spiritual. Those are the domains that if I'm not on camera, I can almost. But those are the 5 spheres that are oftentimes thought of as places where there is need. Different ones of us probably weigh those differently. There are aspects of all of us, and that if we look at our own lives and saying, how am I doing in the physical sphere? Well, I'm not getting off the sofa, and I weigh 25 pounds more than I did, 4 years ago. And I probably need to attend to that, not to make myself lovable, but to make myself feel like my body is my ally versus something that I'm lugging around with me. The emotional. I mean, if I'm aware of the fact that I've got lots of feelings that I'm just not letting myself go to, or I'm kind of stuck in an angry or a sad place, I probably need to do some work on that. I need to maybe talk to somebody about it. I may need to just start doing some reading about some of this. There's lots of different ways to approach things. You don't have to go to a therapist every time you're struggling with some things related to emotion, although it's another avenue. The intellectual. I mean, I think that if spend your life as a young mom, having 15 to 20 2-syllable words over the course of the day, and you're not gonna, it may be a good time for you to take an online course or to do something, just to go back and let yourself remember, oh yeah, that is part of who I am. I can think. I'm not just somebody who takes care of, snotty noses and makes sandwiches. There's something else there. The social side, with our partner, with our friends, those kinds of things. And the spiritual side, I mean, I think that that's different for a lot of different folks. Some people, spirituality means some sort of engagement with formal religion. Some people, spirituality means a kind of mindfulness and just a touch with something bigger than themselves. spending time looking at the ocean, looking at the sky, looking at the mountains, just the things that help us transcend the sense of ourselves as the center of the universe, things that help us feel like we're part of something bigger than just us. I think it was kind of one way to think about spirituality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In all the spheres, we can do something.
Yeah. And so I love that is a framework just for kind of checking in with yourself, and another way to think like, well, what might I need most to care for at this time? And, I also, just in listening to you talk about those, several of them can be done together. I mean, you can do something physical with a friend, or you can, do something spiritual. I don't know. It's just,
you can do a walking meditation. For some people, running is meditative. I mean, absolutely. Many things are 2-4s or 3.
Just for those busy multitaskers out there. Cool. Okay, so that's super helpful, and I just love that kind of really expands the definition beyond the kind of first blush things of like, I could get a massage, or I could get my nails done, or I could take a yoga class or something like that. I mean, obviously those attend to some of those domains that you're talking about, but it's just like doing a Sudoku puzzle could be self-care, or like you said, signing up for an online course. I mean, novelty is certainly something that is kind of that shakes off the dust in any of those areas.
Yes, absolutely.
What about the very special way that parenting triggers our our latent issues, and I have experienced that. So like something will trigger me. I mean, of course I can't think of an example right now, but then, then that like I was bumbling along just fine in my adult life until these kids came along and like tripped over this emotional wire. And then I kind of go explore it a little bit deeper. And yes, I do it to enhance family relationships, but it also has kind of like emotional benefit, like I get rid of some old baggage. I mean, do you see that typically as part of parenting? Do you think that's like, does that happen a lot? I mean, what do you think about that?
I think it's absolutely critical that happened. And folks like Dan Siegel, there's a wonderful book called Parenting from the Inside Out that Siegel wrote. That's really, it just talks about what we don't understand and feel. Those are 2 components. I'll get to that in a minute. But what we don't understand and have the ability to feel, we are going to repeat in our parenting. What we don't understand and have a chance to feel about our own childhood, we're kind of destined to repeat. And most of us have things about our childhood that we're pretty clear we don't want to repeat, and some that we do. And some of us, I mean, it's just a fact. Some of us have grown up in less complicated places than others. I think, all of our parents, certainly mine are both deceased, so I can talk about them. I have no doubt they did the best they knew how. They absolutely did. And there were some places where that wasn't what I needed or deserved, or my brother and sister needed and deserved. But so the process is about, it's not going back and blaming, it's going back and understanding. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This is what it's. So when we see our children doing things, and particularly if it triggers something within us, a strong emotion. I remember this with my son more than my daughter. My son was my oldest, where I would hear myself saying things that were my mother's words, consciously doing that. And they were some of my mother's words that I knew as a kid did not land in a way that was helpful for me. So I think that our kids are going to bring up memories. They're going to trigger awareness, and that's good. If we find ourselves just replicating what's going on, and sometimes people will replicate it intentionally, saying it was good enough for me, I turned out okay, and I'm not going to coddle, or I'm not going to, there can be some kind of culturally based mindsets that say, spare the rod, spoil the child, and just, unfortunately, those tend not to facilitate, really flexible and adaptive, positive development in kids. Persevere through it.
Yeah.
Not so much. Some get lost in it.
Yeah.
So I think, you're going to see that stuff. As a parent, there is an opportunity to redo your own childhood in some respects.
Right. Right. And not only redo it for your child to give them something different, but to kind of excavate those things that have been buried in yourself, right?
Absolutely. 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 There's a Native American idea that children are given to the parent. Each child is given to the parent to teach them something. My experience as both a parent and having watched lots and lots of parents, most of us are not very excited about what they're here to teach us.
So how do you get more excited about that? And how do you, what do you recommend?
It's a great question. I think that you will almost never find it unrewarding to try to understand your reaction to your kids, to try to understand your kids' reactions to you. The idea that they make sense, that you make sense, and that there's a way to untangle this puzzle. I think it is being to some extent conscious or mindful of what we're watching ourselves do, and then wait a minute, because oftentimes what will happen is in the moment we'll do something, and then later we'll go, why did I do that? I know that wasn't what was needed. I know it wasn't. And then if we begin to look at that, we're more often than not likely to go, oh, you know where that came from? That came from a part of me that kind of, unfortunately, our kids are programmed for lots of different reasons to maintain kind of an idealized sense of our parents. So when parents are less than ideal, even though kids may grumble and push back against it, kids will oftentimes take with them how it felt to be with that parent. And it's not great. It's not great. So I think that just being aware of the fact that particularly when you do something that later you go, I think that may have had some unintended outcomes, or I don't like how that felt. I don't like how, Jimmy responded to that. I remember my dad saying that sort of stuff to me, or so you stop and you look at it and you don't beat yourself up for it, but try to understand it. Try to talk about it, because back to, what Siegel had said is that you got to kind of remember what happened. And then you've got to remember what it felt like to be that child, to be you.
Okay.
What happened. And that when you can do that, and particularly when you can share that with someone, it doesn't have to be a therapist. It can be your husband. It can be your friend. In a tough spot, it could be the dog. I mean, anybody, just the act of not just carrying it alone has a way of freeing us from it, so that when we're in a situation that triggers those same feelings that our parents had towards us, we have a sense of, oh, wait, no, I don't want to do that. Yeah, that's what I've got I've got an impulse to do that, but I don't have to do that. I don't want to do that. The remembering and feeling that's required, and sometimes that's hard, because sometimes those feelings they're not comfortable. They're not easy. Sometimes they're powerless, and sometimes they're shameful, and sometimes they're this core level of kind of feeling like you're unlovable. Powerful stuff.
So so I can think from my own experience of like going through the routine, and all of a sudden I'll be like screaming at my daughter, and then I think like, wow, how did I get from just like saying we have to get our bags and get into the car to being like from 0 to 60, so to speak. And so over time I'm much more mindful and don't respond that way. But I remember a couple years ago, like just noticing that had happened. And actually even the other day it just happened when my daughter like went to go take some cookies that we had already talked about that, we weren't going to have dessert that day. And she had the presence of mind to say to me like, wow, why did you get so mad? Like that, that was like, that seemed like, did the reaction match the stimulus? Like, mommy, you were really doing that well. Yeah. And, so for me, like that is the, that's how I recognize in retrospect that I've been triggered.
That's a perfect example, Kate. Perfect. And then when we're able to say to our kids, I don't know, I don't want that either. And that, because you're going to blow it from time to time. Sometimes you're going to blow it in ways that your parents blew it with you. And sometimes you're going to blow it in your own creative ways.
Yeah.
Just happen. The parachute that we always have is repair. It's connect, tear, and then repair. But the responsibility for the repair always lies on the adult. Mm-hmm. The child comes back before you and says, Mom, I'm sorry I did that. And I'm not saying you're not allowed to say something.
Wait, I have to say it first.
I have to say, no, you're making me feel like a bad parent now. But you don't let those tears just simmer. You don't leave them there. I'll tell you, you don't do it with your partner either. The thing is that, relationships grow through that process. You connect, you have a tear, they're inevitable, and then you make the repair. Mm-hmm. And the relationship is actually stronger and more secure following that repair than it was before. Mm-hmm. It's not horrible to make a mistake. It's a real big issue if you don't figure out how to make a repair.
Okay. And so if that, example I just said is like, that's kind of what I've noticed, how I can tell that I've been triggered. And then the next step that you're saying is to just repeat like what we should do in terms of the feeling and sharing, remembering, feeling, sharing.
I think we go to maybe the first thing, if it involves somebody else, which most usually does, so we go and say, I didn't like that. You shouldn't have taken the cookie. I get it, sweetie, but you're a kid, and I got really angry at you. I don't think it's really about you. I'm sorry. I hope you'll forgive me for that. And now don't take the damn cookie next time. You don't have to go with one or the other. Mm-hmm. It's, sometimes you've been triggered by something that's understandably triggering, but not at the level of affective response that you're delivering. So you make a repair, and then you spend some time thinking about that. Maybe if you're a meditator, maybe you spend some time just trying to remember a time when you felt like that. Or maybe trying to remember a time when you felt like your daughter felt in that moment. Mm. Because that's as much the window to our past as how we felt in that moment. Because what we're feeling in that moment is largely what our parents felt, not what we felt.
So it's sort of contemplation and feeling, and then you had mentioned sharing that with somebody.
Sharing is, talking about some of this stuff is an incredibly important piece. Because what happens is that particularly difficult emotion will get encoded in a way that it's part of the brain called the hippocampus that determines whether or not things go into long-term or short-term memory, whether or not they get processed, how they get processed, memories get processed. And the dilemma is that really difficult experiences, trauma, oftentimes gets encoded almost permanently in short-term memory. So when something comes up and triggers it, it's as if it's just happened. Mm. The things that we know that's really helpful in transitioning things from short-term to long-term memory is the very act of sharing it with someone else. Mm. It causes it to kind of stamp it as in the context of that shared experience together, talking about it. There's some other things that are really, really helpful. There's a psychological or a treatment called EMDR, which can be really helpful in transitioning and reintegrating memory. But just talking about it is hugely helpful.
Oh, so if I'm just like from a layperson's kind of understanding, it's like something very emotionally upsetting happens, and then the reason. So if it goes into So if memory goes into long term, then it doesn't trigger us if that thing
When,
happens again.
when the memory comes back, it's oh yeah, that happened. Yeah, I remember that. This is overly simplistic.
Right.
And it is kind of like, yeah, that. Where if it's short-term memory, it's like, holy shit, it's just happened. We have an affective response to it that's different from that of a reflection on something that happened in the past. We have a narrative, we have a story for that happened, that, because the narrative helps us, and that's kind of a left brain. You create a story about what happened. That also helps keep it in the past. Traumatic events are oftentimes they're just affect, they're just emotion. They don't even have a story that fits with it very well.
Okay, so I feel like we've talked about kind of two pretty distinct ways to think about self-care. I mean, I feel like one is the kind of like taking inventory of what you need in terms of like physically, socially, spiritually, intellectually, et cetera, and kind of filling those buckets. And then the second is this more taking care of your emotions so that you can be more present with your child, right? And feel better, probably.
Yeah. Learning as you go, taking the opportunity of your role as a parent to help you work through some things that probably got stuck in a way that isn't ideal.
Yeah.
So,
do you have any messages for I kind of really enjoy that process, so I'm like very eager to do that, but I know that is not I know that that's not really typical. Do you have messages for people who would sort of like rather not do that, or like which is rather keep those things in the past and not re-excavate?
Yeah. There's a saying from the generation before me: less said, sooner forgotten.
It's the opposite of what you're saying.
That is the opposite of what I'm saying. That there are plenty of folks who kind of still work with that model, or good, bright, thoughtful folks who just they say, I don't want to go there. I've spent too much time there. I'm not going there. Yeah. And I mean, I think you have to honor people's sense of some of that stuff. I mean, sometimes people know what they can go back and uncover at a given moment, and what they can't. So it's not about wanting to strong arm anybody into that process, but I would, from a stance of just trying to be persuasive to do that, is that it's freeing, it's releasing. And once again, I think Siegel's book, Parenting from the Inside Out, is probably one of the best things you could read. I think it's an audio book too. One of the best things you could read for just to get some insight on how it is that dynamic plays out. I think that for those who are reluctant to go there, I mean, part of the dilemma is they oftentimes, it's too vulnerable and they don't have anybody that they feel safe enough to be able to share that level of vulnerability with. These people should maybe look for a good therapist, maybe a support group, things like, if their parent was alcoholic and adult children of alcoholics, or Al-Anon, or just some place where they begin to have a sense that they're not alone with that content. Because I think that's, people don't want to go there because there's some level of shame that they have. There's some sense that they'll be judged, and that the other one is it's just going to come up and overwhelm me, and I'm not going to be able to function. So let's be respectful of some of that.
Yeah, and I completely think that people need to be in charge of their own process and kind of be managing it and going at their own pace instead of what somebody else tells them is the right thing to do. And I don't want to I don't want this to come off as like I don't know, strong arming or countering that, but like until you do that, is that stuff getting in the way of connection with your child?
Yes, I would say yes. I would say that it's getting in the way of you being able to feel like you are the parent that you really want to be. And that your kid is reflecting that back. Now, once again, everybody's always going to make mistakes. None of us become these fully actualized characters who...
Yeah, have you ever met anybody who...
wouldn't want to. I would. I'm certain I wouldn't like them. And it's also to say that some people have, once again, some people grew up in just very loving and kind of gentle and supportive families. They just did.
But today, I mean, really, do those people not have issues either?
No, they still have their own stuff.
Okay.
They have their own stuff. But their stuff is not likely to be as blinding and as impactful as those who grew up in a more complicated place. So, and I think one of the dilemmas is people oftentimes think of their childhood as being far better than it probably was in a lot of ways. And so the more certain you are that your childhood was wonderful, probably the better the likelihood there could be some benefit from looking at it, because they rarely, none of them are perfectly wonderful. If you can't identify the places where it would have been so much nicer if somebody would have got something they didn't get, somebody knew how to be this or do that. If you can't identify some of that, it means that you're kind of stuck in an idealizing stance with what happened to you, and you're going to repeat it.
Whew. Good stuff.
It's big stuff. This having children, keeping the species going and loving things as much as we love these little characters. I mean, it is big stuff, and it's, I wouldn't trade it for anything. And it is, it's challenging. It's challenging because we all come into it with our strengths and weaknesses. Our understanding of the power and the importance, if we go back to our pillars, an understanding and belief in our own hearts, our own being lovable, so that our love for our kid, we recognize how important it is and how healing and wonderful it is for their little spirits, while at the same time, an appreciation for how helping them encounter challenges and develop new competencies. And I think that, some of us are going to go, ooh, some of us are when we begin to look at our stories, we're going to go, ooh, I've been pushing competency pretty hard. I've been pretty, I read something, and it was in the New York Times that was on how to have children that thrive. And I number one was maintain pressure. I just thought, what would thrive? What you mean? If thriving is defined by, going to medical school, or thriving is defined by being, successful on Wall Street, or those sort of, maybe, right. But an awful lot of the folks who find themselves on these highly achievement-oriented pathways experience themselves as going down some blind alleys in the pursuit of feeling what they really want to feel, which is some balance of being truly lovable and truly, competent and capable. So, yeah. So it's complicated. It's very complicated.
Yeah. And I mean, well, certainly that what is the definition of success? I mean, probably a topic for a whole nother conversation, but that academic and professional achievement is very highly pushed and esteemed in our culture, but that might not be all that we're trying to do as parents.
Yeah, we can lose our way for some other things that are very important, and I think it's possible to pursue both, but only with a conscious effort and awareness of how different the two needs are, and how you have to approach them both differently.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I think we are out of time for today. So it was great to chat with you. And thank you as always for your insights and your stories.
Good to be here, Kate.
Yeah.
Next week when we talk about something else.
Sounds good. Okay. Thanks, John.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.
See you soon.